Welcome, everybody, to the Investors Podcast 2.0 Wealth Mindset, where we dive into the minds of the successful real estate entrepreneur to uncover the tips and tricks that have allowed them to keep moving forward. I am your host, Scott Bauer, and I'm excited that you're here with us. Welcome, everybody. It is another episode of the hashtag Investors Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Bauer, and today I am excited because we got Scott Royal Smith with us with it's Royal Legal Solutions. And I'm excited today because we're going to talk about something that I think everybody listening to this podcast is applicable for. And that is asset protection. That is, how do you cover your rear end in this business to make sure you can't get burned from somebody else and a stupid, legal bind that could take all your hard work you've worked for years for away and, just super fast. So Scott, welcome to the call, man. How are you?
Hey, man, it is great to be here with you today. I mean, I think a lot of people probably have heard me on other people's shows, and they know that I'm an attorney as well as real estate investor. And, I actually got into what I do now because I had a friend of mine that lost over $3 million in real estate from a single lawsuit, and that it didn't have to happen to him if he just took really simple steps. And that's when I got fired up about the importance of asset protection, making sure that if you ever get into a lawsuit that you lose little to nothing, and how can you use the strategies that the uber rich use just as like the common investor and be able to afford that. So I'm stoked to be able to come on here today with you and help answer any of your questions and help fill in your audience about like, hey, what are the simple things they can do to make sure that they don't lose anything if they're ever sued?
Yep, absolutely. Well, before we even get into that, let's back up, let's back up to the beginning of your career. Where did you originally start at, and how was it that you morphed into kind of, specifically where you're at today?
Yeah. So I actually bought my first piece of real estate as an active business. It was a transmission and auto repair shop when I was in law school. And I flipped that business and building to be able to graduate from law school without any debt. I was one of the only people in my school to be able to say that, right? And that's where I kind of fell in love with real estate. And I continue to invest in real estate, ever since that point, right? And I also worked as a litigation attorney suing insurance companies, because come to find out that insurance companies love collecting premiums, but they also love denying coverage, right? Yep. Especially when things get expensive. So after spending about a couple of years doing litigation work and suing insurance companies, I went in and looked at, my P&Ls, and I said, holy smokes, man, I'm making more on my side hustle doing real estate than I am over here doing litigation. So I'm just going to go do real estate. So I went to go do real estate. I was buying a lot of single family homes at the time was my niche, my bread and butter on that. And I ran into a lot of the same problems that I think if you're listening to this podcast that you've run into, which is how am I supposed to be holding all these homes? How do I use land trust to create anonymity? How do I save money on taxes? How do I incorporate this with my estate planning? All of the complexities that run into as you begin to have, 1, 2, 3, 10, 20 properties. And I ran into all those myself, and I had to solve those problems for myself, right? And then what happened was that I ended up meeting a lot of people at meetup groups who said, hey, Scott, what are you doing for your asset protection? What are you doing for your tax savings? What are you doing for your estate planning? And I said, well, this is what I have figured out to do. And they said, oh my God, man, this is incredible. Can you put this together for me as well too? And that's kind of how I accidentally started a law firm that I didn't ever intend to really do, because there's just so many people out there that need that kind of help. And now with Royal Legal Solutions, I get to help clients in all 50 states and every single type of asset. We help them comprehensively as a one-stop shop. So it's really the most fun thing that I can think to do, even though I'm already retired at 35, right? I'm like, I still wake up every day fired up to put in my 60-hour weeks, because I'm like, man, look how many people we are actually out there like fundamentally changing their lives.
So, and that's great. I couldn't agree with that anymore, right? I mean, you're out there helping somebody and helping people save their rear end in possible situations that could happen. So what is it like with all of the clients that you have, with all of the people that you've helped over the years now? I mean, what is the number one thing or biggest issue that you help them solve, or biggest thing that they come to you with? They come and they say, hey, Scott, this, what is that?
Yeah. So I think if we search inside of ourselves, right, as we begin to accumulate any appreciable amount of wealth, I think all of us start to wonder and fear about what happens if this all goes away, right? Like, how can this be taken from me, right? One of the key things that I think that I've seen from my litigation experience is the understanding that lawsuits in this country are not based upon truth. It doesn't matter who's honest. And in a single lawsuit, you can sue somebody for as much money as you want to, which means that if you're left unprotected, a single lawsuit can completely wipe somebody out, right? And my belief is that that's an unacceptable level of risk, because starting over is super hard. And that the place that we really want to get to is a clear understanding of what does financial freedom mean for us, right? That's a financial question that we need to look at our costs and our expenses, and then chart that over time to what investments we need to make. And the second consideration that we need to have, which is what most people come to me and ask me about, is how can I make sure that the things that I built, I never lose? And that I also don't want people to know what I own. I want anonymity, because I don't like people to have that much information about me. It makes me uncomfortable. So those are two of the really big things. It's how do I make sure that I don't lose anything from lawsuits, and how do I hide my stuff, because I want that privacy.
So, with saying that, some people might think, oh, I'll set that up later. I'll set that up once I get to this level. I'll set up the protection, when I have 100 doors, or when I have, 20 houses or whatever, right? But when would you recommend for somebody to do it? Right now.
Right now. Right now is the time to do it, because the longer you wait, the harder it is to get cleaned up over. And then this is actually if you're even newer into the game, right? It's actually the most important time to secure that you don't have the back steps, right? Because for you to accumulate your first $100,000 in net worth takes years and years of hard work. As you accumulate more money, it's actually easier to make more money, right? As we go along, right? So the times to make sure that you have your foundation secure are right now. So that way you don't incur those big expenses later on, and that you don't have the back steps that would then actually delay you years to get back to the place you are right now.
So let's say that somebody is let's say they're just getting started, and it's the right time. They understand that this is an important piece of their business. It's very, very important. But they say, hey, Scott, man, I don't have enough money to get this done. Is it expensive to incorporate this into your business?
No, you can actually get strategies in place, depending on what you want to do, that are under $500 to be able to put in like the very most basic types of like anonymity, right? And the beautiful part about what we look at is we look at what's appropriate for that individual and their goals, right? Of saying, great, well, where are we growing, right? And everything that we do at Royal Legal, everything builds like Lego blocks, right? We think about it as like a castle of protection. And that means what we can do is just start at whatever level you can afford and at whatever level is appropriate for you, right? And then over time, we're going to be able to build onto that. We can first look at stacking the first brick, and then we can build the wall, and then we can put in the moat, and then we can put trees around it to make sure nobody can find it. You don't have to put all these things all in place at one time. You can put in one piece and then chunk it up over time, and you never have to go back and redo anything, because it's in the redoing of something, not having the plan long-term of how you're growing and how those pieces are going to work over time, that costs you tons of money, not just in attorney's fees, but also taxes, CPAs, and everything across the gamut, your time and stress. Start it the right way with like one cohesive strategy that builds with you as you grow, and your life will be so simple and it'll be so smooth.
So much better. And I could not agree with that. I mean, it's very similar to like the accumulation of wealth, right? Let's say your wealth strategy is to buy 1,000 houses. Well, you don't start with 1,000 houses. You start with 1, and then 2, and then 5, and then 20, right? And so, the asset protection thing comes the same way. So let me put some examples out there. Let's say that somebody owns several different asset classes worth of real estate. They own some single families. Maybe they own 10 single families. They own some notes. They own some multifamily. I'm asking for a friend type thing.
Sure.
Let's say that they have this, and these are all different asset classes, and they're all held in different LLCs at different times. Some have partners, some don't. I just did something out there. And, how would you tell them to try to navigate through that? So like, I have an operating company that buys all of my assets for this friend of mine that I know. Okay. He has an operating company that buys all the assets. Now, once the assets are purchased, they're then put into other classes. They're in other LLCs to protect them. For an example, I know that he puts his single family houses into an LLC. Or maybe a couple of LLCs, and he puts his notes in another LLC because he doesn't want to have the same liability for both, right? But if you look hard enough, you could probably figure out who owns these LLCs and ultimately who owns these properties. So why, how would you tell somebody to navigate through that? Is that
Yeah.
enough?
So yeah, for sure. Yeah. So let's just start. Let's just start with thinking about what's the basics of the structure around the protection, right?
Yep.
We should think about protection as separate from anonymity, right? When we talk about anonymity, what we're trying to do is stop lawsuits before they get filed, right? Because it's going to look like on paper that nobody can find out what companies you own and they can't find who owns any of those assets, right? So if it looks like you qualify for food stamps on paper when people are looking to sue you, you're not a good business decision for them to spend thousands of dollars to come after, right? So we say, great. Well, anonymity is a really good place to think about and also really important. On the other hand of it, we're looking at it as like the protection side of things, right? And the protection side of things, we're saying, well, what happens if somebody does sue? How much can they really attack us for? And how do we defeat those lawsuits if they do come up, right? Because we can't stop somebody from filing a lawsuit, right? We can dissuade them with the anonymity from thinking, hey, this is a bad idea, but we can't actually stop them from doing that. So we need big guns if they actually do come after us. And the way that you look at how big your gun is you have to understand the game of litigation, right? The game of litigation is all about how much money do I spend on the front end to go after somebody, and then comparing it to how much money can I make from this lawsuit, right? It's just like any other investment or business decision that you would make, right? It's just something that attorneys are doing, and that's through a mechanism called a lawsuit, right? So what the best vehicle to use, hands down, is what's known as a Series Llc. And a Series Llc, it's been around for about 20 years. You can establish it in a ton of different states. You can establish it in one state and use it in any of the other states per the full faith and credit of the Constitution, which says any laws established in one state have to be recognized in laws of the other states, right? In this case, it's laws that establish the Series Llc. They're very clear laws. Nobody's even tried to challenge them because they're so strong. There's no cases of people actually trying to even claim that a Series Llc isn't a valid structure or anything like that. So it's a very, very strong structure. And the best part about a Series Llc is that you only have to pay to create and maintain a single entity with the state. It's one Series Llc, one EIN number, one bank account, one set of tax returns, one maintenance, right? But a Series Llc allows you to create an infinite number of what are called child series underneath it for free. And you can create them on your own desktop to just create the document and sign it. The legal effect of that document, though, is as if it were a new LLC. So by creating one Series LLC, I can then effectively create an infinite number of LLCs underneath it absolutely for free and not have to pay any of the upkeep, maintenance, or setup for any of those. So what you could then do for your friend, Scott, is to, you want to compartmentalize like one asset and each individual child series. So that way, if something happens with that asset, right? A wrongful foreclosure on a note, or an improper eviction on a single family home, or grandma falls to the stairs on one of your properties and wants to sue the landlord or whatever. And the insurance company says, hey, you should have fixed those stairs, so we're not going to pay for it, right? Which happens all the time. And do it. The most that they could ever go after would be that one single asset, right? It's the compartmentalization of the assets that reduces the dollar signs in any attorney's eyes, because said, hey, even if I do sue Scott because, grandma fell through the stairs here, what can I get? Well, I'm only going to get the equity that's in that one property. That's not enough money for us to go after the lawsuit.
So you're basically isolating each different asset or each different, property, if you want, into its own box that somebody could go after. Now, that's kind of, the general people, I think, know that. That's kind of what the protection of an LLC does for you. But if you have a new LLC for every single property that you own, you could have hundreds, if not thousands, of different LLCs, of which you have to file a tax return for each individual one, right?
Yeah, and pay franchise taxes for it, all of your yearly public information reports, all of your filings, etc. So you can actually do everything a Series LLC can do with individual LLCs. It's just that you pay a lot more. And you have to spend a lot more time maintaining all of these. And you have to have separate bank accounts. You have to have separate accounting books. You have all of these extra overhead costs. With a Series LLC, you get all of the protection you would with having individual LLCs, but you only have to maintain one entity, right? You only have to file taxes per one EIN number. You have one set of accounting books, and inside of that accounting books, you just tag the income and expenses of each of the individual child series. That way, if you're ever challenged, you say, hey, listen, I know exactly what belongs to each one of these entities that we come in here. We're operating this as true and independent businesses. So you can think of it as like getting the absolute best protection you could possibly get, but you're getting it for a fraction of the cost, like thousands of dollars less in yearly costs.
So I mean, I've been around enough. I've never really heard of a Series LLC, but I've always thought in my head, like that's all that makes sense, right? Why would you not have something like this where you have, basically one company and then you have lots of other sister companies underneath of it, right?
Yeah.
Is it new? Is it new? Has it been around?
It's been around for like over 20 years.
Okay.
I think the issue is that, the law moves really slow, right? And then who does a Series LLC benefit? It's a really just niche amount of people that are really get impacted. Because most people, like if you just have like a normal business, right? You just need like a single LLC, maybe I got like one asset or some stock or some cash. Maybe I put that into an LLC or something if I want an asset holding company. As real estate investors, though, the Series LLC is uniquely leveraged, right? Because we know that we have assets that are expensive, right? That we have a lot of money tied up into, that we want to protect those from lawsuits. We don't want somebody to be able to sue us and get to all of our real estate. We don't want somebody to be able to sue a piece of our real estate and come after us or any of our other properties, right? But at the same time, as real estate investors, we have to be very conscious about our costs, right? Because we're on a game of financial freedom, which means we have to be very cognizant of all the costs that we take on, because our ROIs are really easy to get eaten up with expenses. So I think that's why we don't see a ton of it and like mainstream appeal. And then actually that's my job, right? I think I'm one of the very few people that are trying to bring this to the mainstream and real estate investors are really the absolute people that have like the best benefit. And that it's dramatically different for them versus anybody else.
We're absolutely the bread and butter for what this is going to work for, right? Because really each individual property is in and of itself its own little business, right? It has its own, P&L, it has its own costs, it has its own profits, it has its own problems that could happen. If you're just doing a single family house, there's all sorts of things that can go wrong. There's all sorts of issues that could come up. If you're buying a property subject to and wrapping the note and then selling it and then something happens in the middle, I mean, there's a lot of ways that you could have problems, right? Is that something, let's use that as an example. Let's say you take a property over subject to the existing financing from the original seller, and then you turn around and you wrap that note and you sell it again. Well, if you sell it again, you do have to disclose to your final buyer that, they're being second lien position, because you're the subject to on the first lien is going to obviously come first. But would you use like a land trust, a land contract, a land trust to do that? That is a very, can be complicated for a lot of people, including myself. We're trying to figure this out right now on a few deals.
Yeah, absolutely, Scott. So just to walk through this, let's just walk through it like piece by piece, right? So the first thing that we're talking about here is saying, how can I make sure that I isolate my liability for any individual like type of asset, right? So that way, if that property is sued, they can't go after any of my other properties. If I personally get sued because I got into a car wreck that exceeded the limits of liability of my car insurance policy, they have nothing to go after from me, right? Because I protected myself like rich people do. My cash, my stocks, all my properties are all in this asset holding company that don't interact with anybody. They don't do anything. They just hold the assets, right? So we're talking about here saying, well, I now have a particular asset that I've moved inside of that structure and something is going wrong, right? With some part of that deal, some type of breach of contract action, something, right? Well, none of those things are covered by insurance. So if you were doing all of that inside of your personal name as like with just Scott Bauer doing all of it, right? That means that all of the assets of Scott Bauer would now be subject to a lawsuit, including all of his real estate, all of his cash, everything, right? But because Scott was smart and he separated everything out into a Series LLC, now when that lawsuit pops up because of the bad part of that deal, they can only go after what's inside of that one individual child series, right? It's just that one asset, right? But Scott's protected and all the rest of his properties are protected. So we can know that our worst downside risk is just inside of that individual child series. Now, when we start talking about trust and like how are we going to hold like a property inside of a trust, Most of the time what we're talking about is two things. One is because we want a facility of a transaction type, which is like inside of this wrap case, right? Which is very a niche type of strategy that particularly applies to wraps to some degree. The second thing we might want to trust to do is to actually have anonymity and the ownership of an asset. Because what you can do is hold the asset inside of a land trust, and that land trust is in turn owned by the child series of the Series LLC. So people look at it, says, who owns this asset? It just says the name of the trust, but it's a blind trust. People can't find out any information about that trust besides the fact that it's attached to attorney and a law firm, and all that information is protected by the attorney-client privilege. So they run into a brick wall about being able to find out anything that's relevant about the actual ownership of the asset, right?
Does that include banks?
So a lot of times with your banks, you're going to make voluntary disclosures to your banks, right? And we'll say, hey, bank, we want to prove to you some type of our income and our assets so that way you'll give us additional financing, right? So it would be anonymous from the bank, except for the fact that bank's like, well, if you want our money, you're going to show me some of this stuff. But I always tell my clients, like, listen, don't worry about disclosures to banks. Don't worry about private disclosures. Remember, at the end of the day, we're setting all of this up to be able to defeat the lawsuits, right? So we're worried about like what's on the public record, right? That's searchable from the private investigators and the attorneys, which is the field that I came from, right? So like my specialty is, well, how do we make it look like and actually have the pieces in place that attorneys researching this would say, no, I don't want to, that doesn't look right. That doesn't look good to me, of what it would be. But yeah, the land trust is an absolutely critical component for giving the anonymity to stop the lawsuits before they start by making it look like you qualify for food stamps, because it doesn't look like you own any assets unless you decide to tell your bank, right? And that's fine. Tell the banks that you're still going to be protected.
Well, and the reason I was asking about the bank is, let's say you take over a property subject to the existing financing, and then you turn around and wrap it. Well, if there's a due on sale clause in your original loan that you have with the underlying debt, and the bank finds out, let's say on an FHA loan that it was sold, and then they call that the note is due in full, right? If you were to use a land trust, if you were to use a land trust and provide the anonymity, does that avoid that issue?
Yep. The land trust actually avoids the due on sale clause based upon an act called the Saint Germain Act, right? So what we're able to do at that point is you couldn't take your property and directly transfer it to an LLC from your personal name with a loan that has a due on sale clause, like your traditional mortgages, right? So those are going to be the mortgages everybody has for their first 10 properties because those have the best interest rates, right? We typically refer to those as like a conforming loan, right?
Yep.
So in this context, if you transfer it directly to an LLC, right, they could say, hey, we're going to call the note due, right, because it violated this due on sale clause. However, if it's a transfer to a trust, it avoids a due on sale clause because of the Saint Germain Act. Now, the beautiful part about it is that we can transfer the property to the trust, we avoid the due on sale clause, and we create the anonymity of the ownership of the asset. Now, because the trust is owned by the child series of the Series LLC, now it's protected and compartmentalized. So it's those two things working together, which allows you to have the best possible protection. And by the way, the Series LLC itself is owned by another trust that's another anonymous trust, right? Very similar to the land trust, which makes it that they won't even be able to find out that you're the actual owner of the LLC itself.
Who has to be the trustee on that?
You get to avoid a couple of different pieces.
Who has to be the trustee on the original on the trust that owns the Series LLC? Because it probably can't be like it couldn't be.
Yeah, so a lot of times that in some circumstances you don't actually have to list a trustee, but let's just say for example that you are going to list a trustee in connection to the trust, right? If you list your name, now you've given people some idea that you're the owner of the property. Because like you're the trustee of that trust, and they'll find your name and say, hey, what's going on here, right? Into that. Now, so you could have somebody else just be that trustee for you, but the very best solutions and the ones that we use at Royal Legal is actually using me or one of our in-house attorneys to be that trustee, right? So that means as a trustee and all the documentations that are related to any of these trusts or entities, it all points back to me and the law firm. And then what we do is we say, great, now all the public filings are all masked, but what we're going to do is we're going to change the trust document itself. So the trust document will say, hey, Scott Royal Smith is the original trustee of this trust, But immediately upon the formation or the transfer of the assets into the trust, Scott Royal Smith automatically resigns and Scott Bauer is now the trustee. So that way, at no point do I actually have any control of the property, and that I'm not personally being exposed to any liability for your business dealings, right? It's just to be able to mask the public records. And we know, great, it's true at the time that the public records were created, right? But then it's going to shift. So that way I never actually have any of the other power. And that's what's called a nominee trustee service.
So are there specific assets that this is going to work better? Excuse me.
Yeah, I'd say that like what you typically find is that the assets where people are most excited about using a Series LLC are going to be your single family homes and your notes, right? Now, the reason why is because those are the pieces that are easily compartmentalized, and they also work with the existing financing. Apartments and commercial buildings, we typically have to use individual LLCs for those because of the financing and the commercial financing rules from the banks, and that they want it to go a very particular kind of way. And there's some things that we can do in there in some circumstances to use a Series LLC for that, but that has to do with some negotiation with the financing entity. And we take people through that process, right? But if you're a single family home investor or a note investor, the Series LLC is the absolute best structure. And a lot of people wonder, saying like, well, hey, listen, I already have everything in my personal name. What happens when I transfer it over into these land trusts and inside of the LLC structure? Aren't they going to still see my name on the chain of title, right? They'll see that I used to own it. And that's a very critical piece to say, well, we actually will disguise the transfer. We'll make it look like it's a sale to a trust for investors, right? Because that's a very typical thing that you might do, right? You buy an asset, you transfer it to a trust. That trust then has multiple beneficiaries of the trust, which is how the investors get paid. But the investors want to own it inside of this anonymous trust vehicle, right? So we execute in that way to even disguise it more. But guess what? If somebody does take a guess and they say, hey, we still think Scott Bauer really owns this property, even though it's in a trust, and then that trust is associated with this other guy named Scott Royal Smith, at that point, I'm still like, I don't really care, because you aren't sure of who owns it. It's still a ton amount of doubt. And if you decide to go ahead and sue me anyway, fine, I'm already protected, right? And all I'm using that trust for is to say, like, listen, we're going to make it look like it's a sale. We're going to do everything we can on the front end to be able to do that. And it's highly, highly effective. We almost never run into lawsuits with our clients because everybody is so dissuaded to be able to file suit, because who are they going to sue? Do they want to sue the guy that looks like they put in all this protection in place that they're going to have to go fight through? Or are they just going to find a different lawsuit to go after?
Yeah, at that point, you're not the low-hanging fruit anymore for the people trying to sue you. I mean, as I'm sure people listening to the show understand and know, there are attorneys out there that specifically are just looking for targets, right? There are people out there that are just looking for people to sue, opportunities to sue, people, high net worth people that own a lot of assets that are exposed, that are just have a big, huge, dot on their back, basically saying, hey, sue me, because I got all these assets.
That's what it is when you own assets in your personal name. Assets in your personal name is the target on your back, right? That tells them from the very beginning that you are a good target to go after. And it means you're almost going to be guaranteed to be sued. And the reason why is because when somebody owns assets in their personal name, especially real estate, right? Because you can't hide real estate. I can't transfer real estate offshore, right? Right? I can't do any of that, right? And the target becomes so severe because I know for a fact, if I'm putting on my plaintiff's attorney's hat, that if I can see like, hey, Scott owns 8 properties, he's got, a couple $100,000 in equity among all these properties. I tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and sue him for $500,000, and I'm going to be willing to settle for $50,000, into it. And it's going to be a quick thing because I can know that it's not okay for Scott, for him to be put in a position of being totally wiped out financially. And he'll be probably willing to pay about $50,000 to get me to go away, because the risk and the stress and how much it grinds through your life and the attorney's fees, if you actually get into that lawsuit, is so severe that almost everybody pays. That's why 98% of lawsuits settle, because it's an extortion scheme. It's an extortion scheme that you can protect yourself from.
So, Scott, it sure seems like you've seen this a time or two.
Yeah, it's from my background in litigation, and I still work on this too now, right, with helping people on the defense side of it. Because honestly, like a lot of this plaintiff's attorney work, it's all extortion, right? And I don't like that. I don't think that that's a fair thing to do to people. And that's why I commit, my life, my free time now, that I could be doing anything else in the world, and just making sure that like, hey, as we're working our asses off to be able to get, through the money making part of things, let's make sure we don't have setbacks, and this is how we do it.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, so the complexities, or what appears to be complex, right? This process of protecting yourself, I think for a lot of people, and myself included, in the past, was like this thing that was out in front of me, but I couldn't really see it. I didn't know exactly how to do it. It wasn't my strong suit, and so people just don't do it, right? And those are the people that
Yeah.
end up getting with the targets on their back. Like we said earlier in the call here, it's something you should do now. Don't wait till later, but do it now. So you can keep your ass covered, make sure you don't get sued and take all your hard work away, right? I mean, that's my biggest fear. I mean, it really is. You work and work and work, and you make risks and take, gigantic risks, and maybe risk your whole life savings for, your first property or whatever it is. And then somebody could just come and sue you and take it away from you just like that. Like, that's the worst thing you can think about. That's a nightmare right there, right?
Yeah, it absolutely is a nightmare. And I think a lot of people, they know that they want to take action on it. They know they want this problem solved, right? So, if you're listening to this podcast and that's you, you're right to think that, because there is a ton of information that all conflicts with each other, all online, right? So where is the trusted sources of like what that can be, of like what can take you through that, right? And that's why I built Royal Legal Solutions, right? Was to be able to say, well, great, well, here's the ways that are time-tested ways that we use for over 2,000 clients in all 50 states. That is the process. Like, it's a mechanical process that we walk people through. We know, here's the questions we need to ask you on the front end. Here's the types of recommendations that we've seen as best practices for people that have the same objectives, the same type of asset class that you do. And we go through that process to hold your hand through, okay, what do we need to do for entity structuring? What do we need to do for tax, for our bookkeeping, for our estate planning, to make sure that we're passing the assets and taking care of our children appropriately, for generational wealth, or whatever might be important to you there. And then I do it all with a single point of contact, so that you have like one voice to listen to, one expert that can put all of the pieces of puzzle together, and then train you on here's what you need to do next, right? As well as having continuity. Like, all of the members that come into our firm, we meet with them once a quarter, because we want to ensure that they're doing everything correctly. Right? So it's a quick, like 30-minute meeting, like once a quarter, but it's a very efficient and effective 30-minute meeting to say, hey, we're looking over your back to make sure you're doing everything correctly. That those loose ends of the deals that you did, but you forgot to transfer them into the entity structure, let's go ahead and move those over now. Okay, let's make sure that the bookkeeping is going to line up with that. So it's really like this comprehensive service, right, that I've had to develop in Royal Legal, because honestly, that's what people really need. Because real estate investors should be finding deals. Yep. They should be making money, because that's the piece that nobody else can do for you. Everything else, Royal Legal Solutions is gonna be able to do. And I think that's what's most exciting, because like making money and finding those great deals and charting that path to financial freedom fires you up every day. And you're putting in the 12-hour days, you don't even feel it, because you're just so excited about what's going on, and you don't have all this baggage weighing you down of like all the stuff you should be doing, but you're just trying to ignore. You're like, okay, cool, I got somebody else that's doing that for me, and it's very affordable to be able to have them do that.
Yeah. Well, and is it all? So it's one thing with the properties, each asset that you have. Same thing with like bank accounts. I mean, you're gonna be able to have an LLC or whatever that would protect you from all your bank accounts, from all your, let's say you do have stocks and bonds, things like that. Let's say you have all of the different wealth components. I mean, this is a comprehensive piece, right?
It's a comprehensive piece. All you really need, if you're a single family home investor, right? Single family and notes, all you need is one Series LLC. All the individual child series are going to own all of your hard assets, right? One property correlated with one child series of that Series LLC. Now, it's a parent-child structure. So you have a parent Series LLC at the top, and then all of the individual child series are underneath it, right? And they all go chart back up, just like a pyramid, up to the parent, right? So the parent isn't interacting with anybody or doing anything and doesn't really own any of the real estate or any of that, right? So in the parent company is where we can hold all of the cash and stocks, anything else that doesn't have individual liability, right? Like somebody can't sue your bank account. Your bank account can't do anything to anybody. So
Right.
great, we'll take all of those pieces and jam that into the parent. And then all of the hard assets that have individual liability, let's break those out on the individual child series. And now we put Scott Bauer in the very best position he can possibly be in legally, because if somebody sues Scott because he got into a car accident that exceeded the limits of liability, his car insurance policy, Scott doesn't own anything anymore. So he can be like, cool, sue me all day long. I really don't even care because I don't have anything. Everything is actually over here and something that you can't touch.
Yeah, I mean, this is like extremely powerful. And for all of you that are listening to this call right now that I know are buying and or own a bunch of deals, own a bunch of houses, notes, this is important. You should really look at it. I mean, Scott, so I did not bring you on today as a sales pitch at all. I brought you on today because this is something that is just like, it's at the forefront of my mind. It's something I think everybody needs to take more seriously than some do. And it's also, here is a solution if you want it, to have an all-in-one process. Because if you're out there and you've tried to find asset protection and whatever, there's a lot of pieces that you'll run into. You have an attorney, and Scott and I talked about this kind of before the call. You have, different attorneys that have different specialties and different pieces, but you get lost in all of the moving parts. And so to have one spot where you can go and kind of get it all done for you, I think that's a huge benefit personally. How long have you been doing this for?
Yeah, so we've been doing it for about 5 years now.
Okay.
Into at the age of Royal Legal. Yeah, so I mean, it's been one of those things, and it's been an evolving process, right? Because what we learned is like we need to keep doing more and more, touching more pieces of the pie to make it more and more streamlined for people. And we're always on that process, right? Like our company goal and mission statement is to be able to facilitate people to financial freedom. Right. And the ways that we see being able to do that is being able to take off everything, all of the complexities, like all of the operational concerns, all of those pieces, and be able to equip them to have somebody else taking care of it for them. But here's the crucial part, Scott, is that it has to be affordable. It has to be something that works inside of the financial objectives of the average real estate investor, that person that owns between 1 and 10 properties. It's easy to provide legal services to the guy that's worth $5 million, right? Because he'll pay you whatever, right? Into it, right? So what we're really focused on is a really critical question, which is how can we, one, take over all of the pieces of the puzzle, so that way that investors, all they have to do is think about, where do I find my next deal? Because that's where we can get them to make more money, to get to financial freedom quicker. The second thing we focus on is we must deliver the absolute best solutions, right? I'm talking about like the kinds of solutions and protections that billionaires would have, right? But appropriate for the average investor. And 3, we must be able to do all of that inside of a cost that the average investor can say, great, I can see the value of this, and that it's going to work inside of my investment objectives. Because if it's too expensive, people just won't get protected, right? If it's too complicated, people won't get protected.
Right.
So this is where it's been, the whole mission has been like geared around that one concept. And what's difficult about it is all of the different puzzle pieces that I and my staff have to stay on expert status about. And we all have to get together and be like, okay, great. How do all of these pieces all fit together? And then we push that and say, great, we actually think we have a new solution here for our clients.
Yeah, I bet that is very difficult. Absolutely. So this might be a hard question to answer, and you might not know the answer. That's okay. But what is the percentage of investors out there that you think are undercover, right? That are exposed, the ones that are, have a target on their back, that maybe own a bunch of assets? Can you put a percentage on that, or is that too tough?
I don't know about the percentage because I don't know all the investors. I know that the people that typically come with us are almost exclusively people that say, hey, I have like one LLC and I just dumped everything into one LLC because I heard that was important, right? Not realizing that if one thing goes wrong with one asset, if they're all in one LLC, they still lose everything, right? So it's just barely better. It's better than owning everything in your personal name, but it's just barely better. But most of the people that we have come through have known for a while they can feel it in their gut, right? I mean, if you're listening to this episode on asset protection, like, you know that you need asset protection, right? Because there ain't nobody out there looking to like just study up on asset protection that doesn't know that it's a concern for them, right? And they own all the assets of the personal name, but they just didn't know like what to do with it. But I can tell you from the groups that I run in with really high net worth individuals and entrepreneurs and major investors, you know, some of these guys, $100 million plus total net worth, even at their level, sitting down with them, I'm like, hey, this is really cool. You're actually paying way too much for the kinds of protection you need because you have 160 LLCs and you have all this stuff and you could simplify everything out. And what they say is, well, I already have it all in place, to heck with it, right? I was like, okay, cool. So that's the lesson of, if you don't start right, you end up paying way more later on, right? So it's starting with the right foundation from the very beginning is really, really important to the long-term growth to keep those expenses down and accelerate the path to financial freedom.
I mean, I think it's super exciting, the fact that you could have one LLC that would then control all of the sister LLCs or child LLCs, whatever you want to call them, underneath of it, and therefore you only have one tax return. And I'm guessing each one of those child LLCs will just be another line item on your return, right? Which is huge, because I don't know about you or anybody else that's listening to this call, but the tax bill I get from my tax guy to do my taxes at the end of the year, you know, it's not a fun number. It's not something that's fun. I like cutting a check for, you know, it's big, and that's not cool. So if I could reduce that, and you could reduce that by, I guess, consolidating it all into a Series LLC, why would you not do that? That would ultimately put more money down on your bottom line at the end of the year, right?
Yeah, it's more than it's saving you on expenses for their CPA and tax, you know, prep fees too. But it's also like the amount of time that you get to save too, right? Because with individual LLCs, you almost always have to have individual bank accounts and individual bookkeeping. Yep. Right. So now you're having to like maintain, like, I don't know how many different sets of books, but one for each property. And then you're like, okay, I have all these bank accounts and different checks have to get deposited in different accounts. And operationally, you spend a ton of time trying to like maintain just the infrastructure of like what's there. Right. So the great thing about the Series LLC is that you can use just the one bank account. It's one EIN number, one tax return. So that way you save a ton of money on your CPA, but you're also saving a bunch of time, because all you have to do is you have one set of accounting books and you just tag the income and expense, you know, inside your QuickBooks for each of the individual properties. So now it really simplifies all of your operations and just really makes things really simple, that like it's once a month or once a quarter, you do your updates. It takes you about 30 minutes for our average client to do that, to just do all of their maintenance. And I bet if you're a real estate investor right now, I bet you're spending a lot more than 30 minutes once a quarter.
Yeah. If you're doing it on your own, if you're doing your own books on your own, you're a real estate investor. Number one, stop doing that. Go hire somebody else to do it for you, so you can focus on doing more deals. But yeah, I mean, most people probably are spending more time than that. Now, one last question: what happens if you have LLCs that are already set up? Can you migrate them into a new Series LLC? Can you migrate them or whatever, so you don't have to close them down?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So there's all of the options under the sun are there, right? Of like, what things can we do? Yeah. We're really, I would say so niche into just this area of like what happens with company structures, estate planning, and tax, especially as it relates to real estate investors. We've really seen it all, right? Yeah. And we've had all the different types of requests come in from the clients. And one thing that I really love about the way that we work in forming relationships with people is we say, listen, you know, I don't necessarily know without having met you if we're necessarily like a good fit, right? But what I can do is say, if you can provide me some really basic information about like where you're at now and where you're trying to go to, I can tell you what are the best practices that I've seen from over 2,000 successful real estate investors that I've worked with, right? And so does that make sense to you? Of like a path and a course for it. And if we can agree on that path that makes sense, then we're going to be able to say, great, well, this is how we would be able to combine what you currently have with like a new system, streamline things down. And ultimately, if it's not saving you money and it's not saving you time, then we're not going to do business together, right? And I understand that. And we've understand that as a core tenet of what we do, is that this is an investment. It's an investment in the future. It's the investment of having streamlined best practices being put in place. And that investment has to have an ROI attached to it. So it's very much of the focus is that we look at it, saying that there's a very hard ROIs attached to everything that we put together.
Yeah, but I tell you what, it's like having insurance. You know, you have insurance not because you love to pay insurance every month. You have insurance because when shit hits the fan and things go wrong, you want to have that insurance to cover it, right? And that's kind of the same thing I feel like with this. If you are serious about your business, you're serious about, keeping your assets long term, you're serious about protecting yourself, making sure you're protecting your family and the hard work that you've, put in to get where you're at, you probably want to look into this seriously, because the asset protection is a huge piece. And every wealthy book that you read, every wealthy investor out there that you'll talk to will at some point bring up asset protection, if not, early in the conversation, because it's important and it very quickly can be taken away from you. So anyways, I think it's great, man.
Yeah. I think that's 100% right, man. I think it's, one of the really like important pieces. And then, and it also, these are real life situations that come up, right? So I have so many clients, and part of what we do as our part of our ongoing relationship with all of our clients is provide them unlimited free ongoing support from our staff, as well as litigation protection. So that way, if they're ever sued, that we're part of their legal team to make sure all the structure gets used correctly in that defense, right? Now, what's super important about that is that I actually had a client of mine that was sued that used a Series LLC off of a flip. And there were some emails back and forth, right? About like some plumbing in the house that had been replaced. And there's some confusion on the emails about that. Come to find out 6 months after the sale that there was a leak in some of the plumbing, and it cost $75,000 in damages to the property. Of course, the buyer at that point wanted to sue my client of it. It's based upon emails. So this is an allegation of fraud, right? An email exchange. So insurance doesn't cover anything with fraud. They only cover simple accidents, breach of contract actions, anything that you sent by email, anything you told anybody, none of that's covered by insurance, right? So she wanted to go ahead and sue because she said, hey, my house got damaged, and I thought you said all of the plumbing in the house was replaced. And my client was like, no, that's not what my email read, but there's some confusion about that. And honestly, that case would have had to gone all the way to trial with 8 random people deciding whose email was right? How crazy is that? At over $75,000. But because she had a Series LLC in place, and because the lawsuit would have happened 6 months after, right, the initial sale, the only lawsuit they could do was against the child series of the Series LLC. After that child series had sold the asset, it didn't have any other assets, and all of the cash from that sale was already distributed out of the child series LLC. So there's literally there's really nothing there for them to sue. So just on the structure of the entity, we were able to get the lawsuit to go away. And it didn't even matter what the law was or what the facts were or what the email said. The structure got the lawsuit to go away.
Absolutely. And that could have gone so terribly negative if there was other circumstances that were there. I mean, so terribly negative, right? I mean, man, I just don't understand anybody that's listening to this. If this isn't sparking in your mind and like really making you think, for me it is, and I hope it is for you as well. Now, Scott, this has been good stuff, man. I really like it. I really enjoy you coming on here and talking about it. Are you ready for a quick lightning round?
Yeah, hit me with the lightning, brother.
All right, let's do it. Okay, so first question's around mindset. How does your mindset have to change to start to think about the importance of asset protection in your life or in your business, if you're not already?
Yeah, you have to think about that as the road to financial freedom, that the wealth that you want is like climbing a mountain, and the worst thing you want to do while you're climbing a mountain is have a backslide, right? Because like every step on that mountain's tough, baby. So if every step that you can take, you make sure that you're not backsliding on, that's what we're looking at, right? It's also about having the right equipment, right? Yep. If you have the wrong equipment and you're on a hard journey, or you overpack your pack or whatever the case may be into that, right? That climb becomes harder and harder, especially the higher and higher you get, right? Yep. So if you start knowing exactly what your plan is, what your equipment is, all that from the very beginning, you're going to have that smooth path up.
Yep. Couldn't agree with that more. What are you reading right now?
I'm actually reading a book called The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer. I don't know if you've ever heard about it, but it's like about this hippie who ended up becoming one of the first software developers and subsequently a billionaire. It's fantastic, though. The whole concept is around the idea of how do you take action in life about the things that you know are important, but also being able to reduce that frontal part of our mind, that monkey mind that's always has all that craziness inside of our heads, and say, cool, you have to settle that down so you can get really high amounts of clarity on like, this is exactly what I need to be doing.
So Michael Singer wrote The Untethered Soul, right?
Yeah, that's right. Same guy.
Yep. So that's actually the sequel to the book you should read after The Untethered Soul, right? The book you're reading.
Yeah, I think that this book is like the intro book about his life, and the Untethered Soul is much more nerdy, And so I'll get into that here next. I'm sure I'll love it.
Yeah, man. Oh, well, awesome. Thank you for sharing that. What are you trying to learn?
What I find impact more than anything else in my life is like how my brain is,
Yeah.
So like for me, like I just moved out to Southern Utah. We still have all of our HQ in Austin, of course. But for COVID, I was like, I got to be out in Utah because I need to be outside. I need to be exercising. I know I need to be like meditating. There's all these things I need so my mind is right, because I know during that period during the day, I need it to be firing at 100%. And that any lost day is unacceptable. So I do a lot of thinking about like, how do I make sure to take care of Scott first and everything that Scott needs, and then everything else will come after that, and it'll actually be easier and more effective positioning it that way.
Dude, I love that you just said that. I love how that comes off, because I'm a huge proponent in that. My morning schedule, just to kind of touch on that real quick for the listeners, my morning schedule is very routine, and it always starts with taking care of me first, including my meditation in the morning, including my exercise in the morning, including my time in the morning, before most everybody gets up. I'm up super, super early. So I love that you do that. That's great. Thank you for sharing it. If you were to start over, your career again, what is one major thing you would change?
If I was going to start, over completely, the biggest thing that I would do is actually seek out smarter people than me earlier on, right? I used to think that I used to think in my younger years that I was like super brilliant and I had like a pretty solid ego,
Yeah.
And what I realized as I've gotten older, maybe matured a little bit, is that there's really brilliant people out there that have already charted the course. I don't actually need to go chart a new course. I can actually just look and see who's charted a course that I like, and why don't I just emulate what they do and and learn from them about how they think. And then I'll have such an easier path, because most of the courses that are desirable and that are repeatable, other people have already done. So coming up with like a whole new course is really just almost like a waste of time, because what's that 1 in 10 million that you're going to come up with something that nobody else has figured out yet?
Yeah. Amen to that. Don't reinvent the wheel, for sure. Do you have like a superpower, something that you like really feel like you shine at, the number one thing that keeps you moving forward?
Yeah. The one thing I've really been enjoying recently is actually just being able to just sit with people. I used to think about like connecting with people, and like what was important about that is the words that came out of my mouth. And what I've been learning more recently is just the power of just being really present, and that's true with my employees just as much as with anybody else. That the power of just being really present and connecting with somebody else doesn't require all of this other communication, right? And like an interesting piece that I've noticed recently from some of my study, like, oh my God, I've been working 10 times harder than I needed to. There's actually something that's like way easier, that's more effective.
Yeah. And that happens so often. I really appreciate you sharing that. That's great. I guess last question is, where can the listeners find you? I mean, I was going to try to add something to that, but there's not really anything to add to that. I mean, sometimes just being present, just understanding, just being there and just realizing what you're doing, there might be an easier way to do it without working so hard. I mean, all of these components is like, it's rewarding, right? It's very rewarding. And so we'll end off our lightning round with how the listeners can reach you if they want to get more involved, if they want to, understand, I guess, how they can protect themselves or what the next steps are. What is the easiest way for them to reach you?
Yeah, it's really the royallegalsolutions.com. And at the top of the page that has like a link to say, take a quiz.
Yep.
That quiz is how we get all of the basic information from you to be able to have a productive first conversation, right? So what we do is like, our process is to come in, whether you think you're ready for us or not, right? Say, let's just come in and just get you equipped with the knowledge base that we have for people that are just like you, right? So if you come in and you take that quiz, my promise to you is what we're going to do, before you give us any money at all, before you have to go meet with salespeople or any of that, right? Is we're going to get you on the phone with one of my staff, and I'm going to pay my staff member just to sit with you and learn about who you are, what your objectives are, where you're going, and they're going to equip you with our very best video and documented resources of what we've done for people that are just like you, that explains everything in detail, that you could take to your CPA, your attorney, you could take it to anybody else and be like, oh my God, this is the whole playbook. I can't believe they're giving this all away to you to tell you exactly how we're going to do it. Because my goal is to get you educated with the very best things that we know. And if you decide it's the right opportunity that you want us to build stuff for you, cool. Well, then we'll go through another part of that process to be able to go through a consult, be able to decide, okay, what's going to be the right price points, et cetera. But whether you think you're ready or not, every single person should just go to royallegalsolutions.com, take a quiz at the top of the page, do that quiz, and at least get the resources, because it's going to save you hundreds of hours of just searching online and the BS from that comes around all the confusion. We're going to tell you exactly what you need to know, and it's going to be down to the very, very nitty gritty. And all you have to do is go to royallegalsolutions.com and then click the take a quiz banner at the top of the page.
I love that, man. I love that. Scott Royal Smith with Royal Legal Solutions. We're going to make sure to add that to the show notes. All you loyal listeners know that, just check the show notes. We'll have a link there to go take that quiz. And of course, if you stayed with us up to this point, which I know that you did, because this stuff is super important and it's applicable to everybody listening to the show, make sure to like, subscribe, and share the podcast so that everybody can get the same information that you got. And of course, check back with us again next week for some more Investus knowledge and information. And Scott, man, thank you for being here. That was great.
Awesome, Scott. Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
All right. We'll talk to you real soon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.